I never wrote about him again, ever. Two things in 28 years. I'm not a touchy, I'm not a feely guy, and that's probably why I quit psychiatry. I mean, if you're not into feelings and emotions and all the backstory, then you ought to be doing something else.
You see that we had to cut the camera there at in the middle because we didn't want to talk about it. This book, though, leads with the column about you.
Reveries of a Newborn Father, June 28, 1985. 3 weeks ago, Daniel Pierre Krauthammer, our first, entered the world. It was a noisy and boisterous entry, as befits a 10-pound Krauthammer. It has been just as noisy and boisterous since. I had been warned by friend and foe that life would never be the same. They were right.
In the it was, at the time I took it over, the publishers and the editors wanted it to be at the front, and I think my dad would have agreed. It was the right thing to do. I felt, he expressed a lot of his love by protecting and by not wanting to take any advantage of the thing that was most dear to him for any purposes other than the love itself, which is why I think he refrained so much from talking about me or my mom. But, I'm the one making the calls, and I love him for that protection, but I would rather celebrate him than be sheltered myself.
Yeah. But when you see him kind of steering me through that, what do you think?
I mean, it's so interesting to me because, he says he's not a touchy-feely guy, and on the one hand, it's very true. I mean, he's, the most wry and ironic and funny, and he doesn't get, mushy and soppy on the outside about anything. But I think at his core, he was all heart, and I think everyone who knows him knew that, which I think is why people were so drawn to him. I think one of his favorite movie characters of all time was Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca, who's, on the outside all hard-hearted and the cold-hearted realist, but deep down he always does the right thing and cares deeply about everyone he loves. And I think, my dad, a lot of the privacy was wanting to keep the most precious, important things to him, just to him. Because, I think everyone deals with this, of how much do you wear your feelings on your sleeve, right? It's been very difficult, frankly, talking about a lot of this and making the decisions to take on the book, but the very personal things that I put in the book in there, and to talk with you about the book. But now that he's gone from this life, I believe
What do I do? It seems my job is to father, a verb which must count as one of the age's more. How exactly to father? I really don't know. The which the idea is its currency is right to insist, but more of what? I've been asking myself that. I rock him and hold him and speak to him in the bravest of tones. We both know, we all three know the truth. Nature has seen to it that anything I can do, she can do better. Mine is literally a holding action.
It is poignant on several levels. It captures the awe and really the uselessness of fathers at the beginning. We have nothing to do, nothing to offer really. But on the other level, your father really wasn't able to do the 3 a.m. changing and the feedings.
I guess where you're going is, my father had some bad luck, and his life was different and my life was different because of that. But how he lived his life, you don't let things get in your way.
Come on, get set, go. Squeeze it, there we go, Danny. That's it. Good one, Danny. Nice, Sarah. Keep squeezing. Good. Okay, there you go. Come on. Okay, Danny, hurry up. Go back.
He made my life wonderful, and he didn't let what happened to him affect me.
Danny,
They're great candles.
Did they think about having more children?
I think they mentioned they wanted me to have a sister or a brother, but apparently that was not to be.
That was not in the cards.
Yeah.
Your dad called your mother his co-author in life.
My father and my mother shared an incredible bond, and their lives were intertwined in a deeply profound way. They met when they were both grad students at Oxford, and his college, which was an all-men's college, and my mother's college, which was an all-women's college, had both just bought a manor house. And so my dad, he saw this form, check where you want to live, you know, single sex, co-ed, check. And so that was the beginning of it. So they met there, and they began their relationship, and they were apart for a while because my dad went back to America to go to Harvard Med School, and my mother went on to practice law in London and in Paris. And that candle stayed aflame, and then she moved to the States to get back together with him, and they were married. And
in between there was the accident.
You know, love is love, and I think that's really the whole story from both their point of view, that was something to deal with, and that was going to be a fact in life, but that's not what mattered.
Coming up,
the last thing he said to me about it is, don't publish it if it's not worthy.
A Massage Envy gift card might just be the best holiday gift ever because it unwraps all the benefits of total body care, including massage and total body stretch, customizable facials, and advanced skincare services, including microderm infusion and chemical peels. Share the gift of wellness and help everybody on your list be their very best. Receive a voucher for 2 free enhancements when you purchase $100 in Massage Envy gift cards, a $20 value. Massage Envy.
He was moving ahead with when his health crisis struck. But as things were getting better, and we saw, or thought we saw, the light at the end of the tunnel, and I had jerry-rigged all kinds of stuff in his hospital room for him to work on his computer, and so he got back to working on the book, on organizing it, starting to lay it out more. And when we got the final prognosis, it was only a few weeks we had, and he entrusted it to me to finish for him. And the last thing he said to me about it, don't publish it if it's not worthy. And I took that to heart in a way that is more important to me than anything.
He chose most of the pieces, but you chose some too.
He had put together a majority of the pieces that are in the book now, but I also read through quite literally everything he ever wrote, and also speeches, transcripts, interviews, and found some very important pieces that filled in some important kind of profound areas that needed to be in this last book.
This is like a puzzle you're putting together here and moving pieces around.
Yeah.
To make it all fit.
I think it felt a little bit like a Rubik's Cube. I was trying to get all the right colors in the right places, but each time you move one, another piece moves. Because the book is so expansive and covers so many topics, everything from baseball and chess to politics and life and fatherhood, it all needed to have an underlying tissue and core that ran through the whole thing.
Daniel explains that core in his introduction to the point of it all.
So what is the point of it all? Of life, of our existence on this planet, of our membership in the vast complexity of humanity? Politics should not say. Keeping politics out of it was the point of my father's life's work. Individuals must define their own meaning.
He obviously didn't want to be defined by his disability at all. He didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to shoot it in a way that it even appeared on television. In fact, there were many people who watched Fox who never knew that he was in a wheelchair. You were hesitant to include anything that focused on that. But in the end, you chose to do it. Why'd you do it?
I tried to do it the way he lived with it. You don't hide it, but you don't say, this is what defines me. There were some columns instead them to be in the book, which in the end was how I think he would have wanted it.
This is a statement of principle that Charles submitted as a member of President George W. Bush's Council on Bioethics during a debate on the creation of cloned human embryos for research. I am one of those in whose name people have spoken and said this research has to be permitted so that I can walk or people like me can walk. But I am not only a patient, I'm also a father. And what I've said to myself about this issue, and I think we ought to say to other people who suffer similar problems and disabilities, is that we have children. And we want to raise them in a world, we want to bequeath them a world, a moral universe in which we think they ought to live. And that we may be jeopardizing the moral quality of that universe, the humanity of that universe, by cavalierly breaking moral rules that we've observed for generations in order that people like me can walk.
There was one thing he said actually in your last interview with him. Everyone has their cross to bear, everyone. Mine's just more visible. And that really touched me because I think everyone does have something, and a lot of it we can't see.
Here we are on the set, on location, Jews at Sea.
Was there ever a time growing up you said the other kids' dads can do this, my dad can't do this, or did he lament it at some point?
Not really.
How was it, Dan?
Okay.
You were up forever.
And of course you're aware of it, but you know, some kids' fathers aren't there. Some kids' fathers are absent or bad fathers. On the whole, I count myself the luckiest son in the world.
I don't think you fell once all day, did you?
No, it was all on purpose.
It was all on purpose, yeah.
He was really, in many ways, kind of a camp counselor to my to my childhood.
Yeah, let's go. Let's pass it around a little bit, guys. Let's pass it around.
He always made sure I was outdoors doing something.
Okay, now listen up. Does everybody here know how to play Finger Down on the Donkey?
Yeah!
We're not going to play it.
Whether it was skiing or swimming or learning archery. And I think this was very much how he grew up, always outside. We would go up to my grandmother's house in Long Beach, and we would have 2 weeks of kind of Camp Krauthammer. We'd play stickball, all the things he did when he was a kid. And so that was a huge amount of fun, and I think he really enjoyed imparting all that to me. He was also insistent that I learn how to ski.
Head down the slopes.
We went on ski vacations all the time when I was growing up, and he would have the hot chocolate at the bottom of the hill, but be watching and make sure I was learning all the right moves and know how to hockey stop, and he wanted me to ski elegantly, not just recklessly.
How do you like that?
For someone with your level of paralysis, you're able to do a lot. Your car isn't exactly an off-the-lot vehicle.
Usually when people ride with me, the first 20 minutes is sheer terror. They just can't believe this thing is going to work, and we're going to go where I intended to go.
It's got everything.
And it's got the ejection seat where you have, that's what that red one is.
When I got in that thing, it was like, don't touch anything. No, the radio is fine, and the air conditioning's great.
Yeah, I grew up in those vans. Yeah, I thought it was kind of cool. There were all these buttons and dashboards, but in terms of my dad's driving, it was really, more the aggressive driver of having grown up on Canadian ice. I remember whenever it snowed in DC and everybody would kind of, be running around there. Yeah, like the sky is falling. He'd be like, wusses. And, he'd drive to work, without even the snowplow having come yet. So
I remember he was leaving the garage one time and I walked out and I waved at him. He said, Brett, just a word to the wise, don't wave at me. It's very dangerous.
Yeah. Gotta
keep, only got the one
keep
hand.
Both hands on wheel and brake. So yeah. One of my earliest memories in that van. My dad was driving us across the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge, which I had never been over. So my dad says, Dan, I want you to get a view of the Statue of Liberty, but I'm looking and I can't see. So he says, okay, do this. You take all the pillows that, of course, I'd been napping on, stuff them up under your butt, sit up really high and straight in the chair, strap in really tight, and as soon as I said I was ready, he then pushed on the brakes, slowed down to a crawl, and I've got this perfect view of the Statue of Liberty. And meanwhile, there's hundreds of cars piling up behind us, honking and yelling and trying to pass us, and my dad just couldn't care less about that. He knew that I was getting something to make my life more rich, and that was all he cared about in that moment.
When my son was skiing on weekends, and on the East Coast, you got to drive a long way to find a place to ski. So the rides are about 3 hours each way. And he is a wonderful mind. I mean, curious. And he'd say to me, Dad, teach me something. I said, okay, you pick a topic. He'd say, the Constitution, tell me what you know. So I'd talk to him for 3 hours about the Constitution. I remember once he said, history of the Jews.
Yeah. It was a constant lesson?
Yes, there was a History of the Jews Part 1 and Part 2. It was a series.
You could have gone to California or something.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I love those memories. We had lots of long car rides. But
so the time in the car was precious.
Yes, a lot of the backbone of my knowledge comes from remembering the way that he told things. He understood it so well and told it in such a cohesive story, that kind of grand sense of history.
I mean, I knew that he could fill to the commercial break, but I didn't know he could fill 3 hours on the Constitution.
I know. I mean, we could, sell the audiobook now if we had been recording back then. But no, I was the sole audience for that. But he knew an immense amount about a lot of things.
After the break.
There reaches a point where you have a real life, a wife and a child, and you say to yourself, I've got a job, what am I doing here? I mean, it's really bad.
Look forward, hit the gas, focus on the road before you. The redesigned Honda Civic with standard Honda sensing and a multi-angle rear view camera.
For charity. Organizers said some 3,500 people took part in this year's event. I'm Marianne Rafferty. Now back to Charles Krauthammer making his point.
Charles Krauthammer was best known for writing about politics, the power, the policies, the people who dominate the news. The point of it all? Not any of that. To Charles, the point of it all was the stuff that folks not politically obsessed live for. Family, friends, a day at the ballpark, a good movie, a game of chess. Well, maybe not chess.
It's a poison. I mean, it's, you reach a point when you're on the internet and you're playing speed chess, middle of the night, where you realize you're in a motel room and you're drinking Aqua Velva. You've hit bottom and you need an intervention. So that's
chess?
Yeah, for chess. You cancel your subscription and you just don't do it again.
This is one of my favorites. I'm talking to him on the back porch of your place out there by the bay about chess. Yeah. And he's really getting into it. I mean, really getting into it to the point where I ask him, do you go over the top? And this is his answer. Yeah,
I have binges. For several years, this has happened to me ever since I was about 20. I'd go into it for a few years and then I have to quit and then I come back, of course. I think Orwell once wrote, if you have a promising young man with a bright future and you want to destroy him, teach him chess.
Did you ever play chess with him?
Yeah, I played a lot when I was a kid.
Was he good?
I was all right. I was not nearly as good as him, but I was pretty good. He taught me, and we played a lot. And I think maybe I got turned off a bit by seeing where it led.
Yeah, right.
But there reaches a point where you have a real life, a wife and a child, and you say to yourself, I've got a job, what am I doing here? And so I gave it up about 3 years ago. But in part it's because of you. Because now that I do Special Report every night, we used to meet on Monday nights, and it was just simply too exhausting.
So he blamed his lack of chess play on me, but
yeah, thank you by the way for that. But no, I remember what he mentions there, his Monday night chess club. They had an entire room in the house that was the chess room. That's all it was used for. It was Monday nights, and they'd have 3 or 4 or 5 games going at a time, and no talking.
Genius, Insanity, Innocence, August 20th, 1993. Chess enjoys a not wholly undeserved reputation for psychic derangement. It is an endeavor associated, when not with frank madness, with oddness and isolation. I remember a psychiatrist friend visiting me at a chess club. He walked in, sat down, looked around and said, geez, I could run a group here.
Yeah, he loved to think, and he loved puzzles. There was an abstract beauty to it that to him was almost like art. And I think he had a deep appreciation.
Which is how he looked at baseball too.
Yeah.
Suffering a relapse and loving it. It's one thing to root for your son's.
Go, run now, run.
I get it. After all, he is your kid, and you paid for the glove, the uniform, the helmet, the bat, and when he turns 9, the cup. You have a stake in him and by extension, his team. But what possible stake do grown men have in the fortunes of 25 perfect strangers, vagabond mercenaries, paid obscene sums to play a game for half the year? I have been a baseball fan most of my life. Why should I care about these tobacco-spitting, crotch-adjusting multimillionaires who have never heard of me, would not care if I was dispatched to my maker by an exploding scoreboard? Why? I have no idea.
In reading what he wrote about it, it struck me that he had such an appreciation for the raw beauty, a perfect double play, or throwing just the right pitch to just the right batter at just the right moment. And so there was the little kid in him for sure that loved going to the ballpark and eating hot dogs, but I think there was a deeper and more soulful meaning, that there's something innately beautiful in what he compared to music or number theory or art. That really expresses something in the human soul.
He called opening day a religious holiday.
Yeah.
Did he impart that love of baseball to you?
He did. I can't claim to be as fanatic a fan as he was, but I grew up playing baseball, Little League. He was probably at just about every single game and practice I ever played.
Is that right?
Up. Yeah. And we went to ball games all the time. When I was little, and then the Nats once they moved to Washington. And yeah, it was kind of, our time together.
He loved movies.
Yes. His favorites were always Casablanca and Lawrence of Arabia and North by Northwest. He could recite them line for line. And with me, we had this tradition of every Christmas Day, as we're Jewish, so we didn't really have a whole lot to do. He would rent a whole bunch of videos, and we would lock ourselves in our TV room and watch movies from dawn till dusk. And my mom would slip a sandwich under the door every once in a while. But he would always choose a theme, whether it was westerns or sci-fi, and it would be the great classics of that genre. So this is kind of how he taught me the great movie canon, so to speak. But yeah, he loved movies.
Up next. So did the kids in the class go, man, your dad's a downer? Why does he tell me that?
Be wise beyond your years. Be young at heart. Do the little things. They're kind of a big deal. Get back to your natural hair color while staying true to your roots. Just for men, be the better man you are and look the part.
It's use it or lose it time at VisionWorks. Your vision benefits are about to expire, so it's time to use them. VisionWorks accepts.
The end is near. I'm trying to make them understand that what you are living through is totally unusual. I was impressing upon them what a wondrous age this was, which if you're 17, trouble getting a date is not exactly the message that you're going to accept.
You remember that?
I do vaguely. He did like the 90s were this anomaly to history in the sense of, a grand battle of ideas and ideologies and things that we have to fight for and protect. And the 90s just kind of felt like everything's great.
So did the kids in the class go, man, your dad's a downer? Why does he tell me that?
Yeah, I think though what also happened when I was in high school was September 11th. That speech he's referring to must have been, just before. And I remember that day took him 3 hours to drive downtown to my high school, which normally takes 15 minutes. But he picked me up, and I remember a lot of teachers and my friends kind of going to ask him, what does this mean? And he said, this means things are serious. And, you know, in retrospect, that was kind of the bookend to that bubble of that time when all of us kids just thought that this is the way it was.
Charles never wrote with more urgency than in the wake of the terror attacks. Your dad was an advocate for muscular response post 9/11. Did he look back and say, maybe we shouldn't have been that aggressive?
Well, I think his words speak for themselves pretty well in the book.
Iraq was, of course, problematic. Critics conveniently forget that the invasion had broad support from the public and Congress, including from those who became the highest-ranking foreign policy figures in the Obama administration: Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Chuck Hagel, and Biden. And they forget the context. Crumbling sanctions that would, in short order, have restored Saddam Hussein to full economic and regional power, well positioning him, post-sanctions, to again threaten his neighbors and restart his WMD program. I suspect history will see Bush as the man who, by trial and error, but also with prescience and principle, established the structures that will enable us to prevail.
You know, there's a lot of second guessing that happened in all the years since. There are a lot of places along the way that things could have and should have been done differently. He did always retain the view that we needed a strong foreign policy that was also careful. And I think that's something that sometimes people paper over. He was very careful and thoughtful in terms of both not wanting America to expend blood and treasure where it was not in America's end interest, but also not waiting too long before something would come back to harm our country directly.
What's notable about the book, so much of what Charles wrote, whether during the Obama, Bush, or Reagan administrations, remains relevant today. In some instances, more than ever.
Thought Police on Patrol, April 11th, 2014. 2 months ago, a petition bearing more than 110,000 signatures was delivered to the Washington Post, demanding a ban on any article questioning global warming. The petition arrived the day before publication of my column, which consisted of precisely that, heresy. The column ran as usual, but I was gratified by the show of intolerance because it perfectly illustrated my argument that the left is no longer trying to win the debate, but stopping debate altogether, banishing from public discourse any and all opposition. The proper word for that attitude is totalitarian.
He saw the 20th century, the totalitarianisms of Nazism and communism and radical Islamism, for that matter, as all seeking these utopias that were going to level human civilization because they sought to change human nature. In the American context, he saw liberalism as not nearly that dangerous, but having those same seeds of being a little too utopian. He feared that out of whatever good intentions, you could have a state that grew and squashed the individual, and that's what he wanted to avoid.
He wrote that the founding of the United States was a miracle. Every 4th of July,
have a big 4th of July party at our summer house on the Chesapeake Bay. We do all the hot dogs and crab cakes and fireworks and all that, but the centerpiece of the entire event was a group reading of the Declaration of Independence. It was always an extraordinarily moving event. You think it could be kind of cheesy or hokey, but you read those words and you realize men were betting their lives on this. He saw his role largely as reminding us that it doesn't just stick around inevitably, that it has to be guarded and has to be passed down to each generation. In the book, he really gets into the nature of what liberal democracy means and why that's let America flourish.
Let us begin on Thanksgiving by giving thanks that we are not French. And I say this with no malice. I mean it this way. We both had glorious, liberating revolutions, but ours was not cursed by excessive rationalism, nor by its twin, hatred of religion. The American Revolution repatriated liberty and established a new political order, but its ambition stopped there. It left the weekend alone.
He's very clear-eyed. He sees threats to democracy, to America, to our prominence as a superpower, to our way of life. But he also had a confidence in America, and he believed that we would figure it out.
Kind of the same feeling on the porch reading the Declaration of Independence.
Absolutely. He had a very big picture view of the world, of history, and I think that's what made his political analysis of a different order. He wasn't just talking about the politics of the day or this scandal or this election. It was, what does this mean in the grand scheme of everything? And that's another layer of why I wanted to finish this book for my dad and to put it out there, because I think these ideas can apply at any time and any place.
It's hard not to come away from that thinking that he was a man of true faith. Right? That's next.
I got you all presents and got cash back using Ebates.
I don't believe it.
Do you believe this?
Bet it's fake. A lot of phonies out there. Yeah, you're telling me. Stand down, Elf.
Shop your favorite stores. Get cash back. Ebates. Join today for a $10 bonus.
For drug-free sinus relief, get Navage, the only nose cleaner with powered suction to flush out allergens, mucus, and germs.
I used to get so congested, but Navage cleans out all the stuff.
Krauthammer told me he was not very religious, but there's more to the story. Wikipedia describes you as Jewish, but not religious.
That's a very fair characterization. Well, my father was a religious Jew, and he said, I can't make you religious. I don't want to force you, but I want to make sure you're not ignorant, because then you won't have any choice. So I studied Hebrew, I studied the religious text, I studied scripture, I studied the Talmud, and then I made my own choice. I chose differently from my father, but the education he gave me had the inevitable effect of attaching me to a culture that I find precious.
So I found that fascinating, having attended that beautiful funeral service God that he planned himself. It's hard not to come away from that thinking that he was a man of true faith, right?
There was a very complex and subtle religiosity and spirituality and sense of identity that he had. His own family history, the people's history, the culture, the language, all the texts, the great traditions of it.
Your father and mother created a music...
Yeah, and they created an organization called Pro Musica Hebraica that sought to find and save and revive Jewish music, classical music written by Jewish composers in a Jewish style that had otherwise been lost to history, and to bring it back to perform it at the Kennedy Center here in DC. And my father also co-founded Hebrew High School, specifically so that I could have what he thought was what I needed, a fuller Hebrew and Jewish education. And he's been involved in a lot of different works with Jewish charities, particularly in education and culture. And so that heritage was core to him and so important to him.
We did not use electrical devices on the Sabbath. As a result, when we sat down to the last Sabbath meal toward the end of the day, we relied for illumination on light from the windows. As the day waned, the light began to die. And when it came time for the Hebrew recitation, 3 times of the 23rd Psalm, there was so little light that I could no longer read. To this day, whenever I hear the 23rd Psalm, I'm filled with the most profound memories of father and family, of tranquility and grace in gentle gathering darkness.
As his son, how would you describe his relationship with God?
His sense of God was kind of the grandest possible sense of it, as removed from a personal God who knows you and me and involves themselves in our lives. But he got there both through the abstract thought and beauty of the Jewish religion and physics and astrophysics and thinking about the universe. And he often liked to quote Einstein's view of God as one and the same with the laws of nature, of how miraculous it is that we live in a universe where all the physical laws align to allow life to exist, to allow us to come about, to think, to have consciousness. That if one doesn't have some kind of reverence for that, then you're missing something.
He obviously passed that on, that reverence, onto you.
You know, I've had my own religious